Here.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're going to start where we've had lots of requests to record this, and I'm so honored. Danielle and I've met a few times prior, albeit at sad occasion. It was Murray, a blessed memory's funeral, and I've had many occasions to speak to her lovely and beloved husband, David. I have warm regards for you, and he's also on this, I see. Your brother-in-law, Howard, said, I should be kind to you because you're a treasure. What beautiful words.
Thank you, Howie.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of our guests for this evening, and then we're just going to jump right into things because we have lots and lots to talk about, and it's going to be, I know it's just going to be a wonderful and interesting evening. So we are honored to welcome Danielle Crittenden Frum, who's an executive producer and host of the popular Fem-Splainers podcast, which she describes as a weekly girls' night out, COVID-friendly, of course, with some of the most fascinating and fabulous women on the planet. That's a very, very modest billing you're placing for yourself. She is the author of 4 books, including What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us, Why Happiness Eludes the Modern Woman. Her other works include a novel, Amanda Bright at Home, the first modern work of fiction to be serialized in the Wall Street Journal. Danielle is also the co-author of a cookbook, From a Polish Country House Kitchen, co-written with the Pulitzer-writing historian Anne Applebaum. Of particular interest to us, she was the managing editor of blogs for Huffington Post Canada, which was launched in 2011. She also created an e-commerce site, Fig and Vine, which curated artisanal Judaica and featured Jewish lifestyle content, and it was sold to Judaica.com in 2017. And as she notes in her bio, and I quote, and of course, I'm married to the magnificent David Frum. See you at 7. So Danielle, thank you so much for joining us on this evening.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Rabbi. And it's so good to see you again.
The same. So I have to say that this topic that we're going to discuss is, and we're getting lots of feedback. So I am going to make sure everyone, if you could please ensure that you are muted, except of course for Danielle. we don't want her to be muted, but if you're not Danielle or me,
you may change your opinion.
No, forbid. This concept or idea that we're going to unpack a little bit for the group tonight is such an interesting idea. First of all, as you probably have experienced, it strikes at the core of how Jews see themselves, or maybe perhaps how Jews misperceive themselves to some degree. As a rabbi, I can tell you I've been a congregational rabbi now for almost 28 years. And so much of the work that I do, apart from all the other things, Danielle, that rabbis do, is working with converts. And over the course of my time, I've tutored, guided, mentored, studied with, been inspired by numerous converts, or as I like to call them, Jews by choice, who have made their way into the synagogue. Our synagogue board is filled with Jews by choice. And every one of them comes, like so many things in life, so many of them come each with their particular story, which I find so interesting. So I first, as things would have it, and fate is always a favorable lady at times, is, of course, it's Hanukkah. And Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic reposted an article, Danielle, that he had written in 2011. And it was an interview that he had with Mel Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
Yes, you probably remember.
Big fan of the Jews, that
Oh, he loves
Mel.
that. Yes. So he had went to Hollywood because to interview Mel Gibson. He had heard that Mel Gibson was interested in developing a movie project on the life of Judah Maccabee. And Jeff Goldberg was fascinated with the man who had famously spewed the vitriol of anti-Semitic diatribe I think on the side of a road in Santa Monica while being pulled over for a DUI. And he wondered how could it be that this guy would want to produce something about Judah Maccabee. Anyways, the article was fascinating. But of particular interest was a comment that Mel Gibson made. He said, that if Judah Maccabee had not succeeded, there would have been no Jesus. Mm-hmm. which on some level certainly rings with some historical honesty. Christopher Hitchin had inflected the opposite. He bemoaned the victory that Judah Maccabee had because he said that it had paved the way for Jesus. But this idea, of course, and it being Hanukkah, reminds us once again, particularly those of us who live in a Western developed country, of the particular tangle and the intertwining that Jews and Christians live with all the time. It is usually more of a task laid at the feet of the Jew than it is for the Christian. And that's why I find conversations such as the one we're going to have tonight to be so interesting, because it turns the table the other way and we can see how people walk into it. And so maybe to open the door for us, Danielle, tell us about you, your beginnings, where you grew up, your family life.
Well, I grew up in Toronto. I came from a newspaper family, which was politically completely opposite from David's famous mother, Barbara. My late stepfather was Peter Worthington. He founded the Toronto Sun, and he was the conservative to Barbara's liberal. And so they didn't get, it's not that they didn't get along. They were very much a part of the same media circles, but they were very different political backgrounds. So it was kind of funny when David and I met. There was a small Hatfield and McCoy element to it. But it all went fine. And I just became absolutely huge admirer, of course, of Barbara, and was lucky to know her for 5 years before she died. And I learned a great deal about Judaism from her, because as you can imagine, like any potential Jewish mother-in-law, she was alarmed at the fact that not only was this conservative coming into the family, and David at that point was very conservative, and that was a sort of talking point amongst Toronto media, that here is, wonderful liberal Barbara Frum. How did she raise this Alex B. Keating if anyone knows that reference?
Yeah.
And here was I marrying him and just egging this whole side of him on. So it was, I totally get why she was not as thrilled as she might have been, but there was also the fact that I wasn't Jewish. And when you're young, and certainly growing up as a non-Jew, I grew up as a believing Anglican, that you think, well, maybe especially as an Anglican, you go, what's the big deal, and of course it's a big deal. And I learned from her. I did not convert upon my marriage, and I've always been very, very grateful to David that he didn't make it a condition. It certainly could have made things a lot easier, I think, at the time. Just to get married, we couldn't have a Jewish wedding. We did find the only Jewish traffic court judge, or one of the few traffic court judges who was Jewish, to marry us in his parents' backyard. But he didn't make it a condition because I think he didn't want it to be forced. That he was taking me, for better or worse, as they say, and if I was going to come to Judaism, that it should not be, with a gun pointed to the head.
Yes.
So, but I was very interested in it, and I know it was important to him, and I wasn't non-religious. I did grow up. I was confirmed in the church. I believed in God. I believed in Jesus Christ, but I never had a kind of intellectual relationship with my religion. I just kind of took it for granted, as I guess one does when you're born into something.
I want to just pause you for a moment. 2 items which are really interesting. Number one, personally, I find in my travels that the more successful converts are interestingly the ones who come from faith backgrounds. They inherently understand the language of religion. They understand the utility that religion can play in a person's life, as opposed to a convert who may approach me, a potential convert may say, oh, well, we came from a family, they didn't observe anything.
Right.
And
Well, if you're an atheist, you're just changing labels, really.
yes, yes.
But no, I felt, but interestingly, I felt from a Christian perspective, all of my religion was based on faith, but in the Christian version that Jesus was going to rescue you. You know, when you had a problem, you prayed to Jesus. You had a very personal relationship with 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 your Lord, and through the figure of Jesus. But there wasn't a lot of what always bothered me, and this was true before I met David, is I never liked the sort of deathbed conversion that, in Catholicism, that you could live a pretty much an unethical life.
Mm.
You could do a lot of bad stuff. And yet, if you professed faith at the end, you were somehow, going to go at least to purgatory, if not to heaven. And that, and I guess I was more intellectual than I thought, and that always really bothered me. I mean, I like the easy forgiveness
Yes.
that Jesus was willing to offer me whenever I messed up. But I just theologically, it bothered me. And so, even though, of course, I knew Jews, I'd never dated a Jewish man.
How
And
did
then, of
you meet
course,
David? How did you guys meet?
in his mother's backyard.
Is that where you met?
Yes.
And what was the circumstance that you guys met?
Well, see, Howie's on. So my brother-in-law is on this, and if Linda's on as well. David apparently had said to his sister, he was graduating from law school in Cambridge. He was coming home, and he complained to his sister that she never set him up with any of her friends, or she'd never come up with, a plausible match. And I'd met Linda. I didn't know Linda that well, but I'd met her at a party for a magazine that we both mutually contributed to, because Linda was also a little bit of an Alex B. Keaton of the time. And thus the children were all in the same sort of political circles that were slightly different from the parents. Anyway, she invited me to a welcome home David party that his mother and father threw in their backyard. Wow. in off York Mills. And
for those who don't know, the York Mills home was a stunning piece of art itself, and the backyard was
right, beautiful architecture.
Beautiful, yes.
Very falling water kind of idea.
Yes.
But I just showed up, and I just thought I was like really thrilled that Linda had invited me, and because I thought I really loved Linda, and isn't this great? We're going to be better friends. I had no idea that in her mind that this was a setup.
Wow.
And David had come back, and there were other mutual friends from our same media circles, and I was hanging out with them and chatting with them. And this young man kept coming up to me saying, I'm really sorry I haven't had time to chat with you properly. I'm like, okay, fine, having a good time. I was just oblivious to the whole thing.
Right.
But then he called, and we went out for lunch, and and the rest, they say, is history. But
wow.
But to go back to the faith part, so I had not had an intimate knowledge of Judaism until I met David. David's parents were more Reform, but serious about their religion. And he, in college, I think, began studying Hebrew, and sort of got more into it. So through him, I began learning a lot about it, obviously, culturally and theologically. And then when we got married, we couldn't have the Jewish wedding, but he never made it a point that if I were to come to it, fine, but he accepted that it might not happen. And at the time, but also more in retrospect, I'm phenomenally grateful to him for that. Because I then began attending Jewish services with him. We moved to New York. We attended these great synagogues. We sort of shopped around as one does. And
Was there one that you favored in New York?
well, eventually we ended up at one on the, it was like one of these breakaway, there was also Jewish politics, but a conservative rabbi. And we went to conservative, some modern Orthodox, but mostly conservative. We found an absolutely amazing place that was sort of very intellectual and a very loving rabbi, but very spiritual. And I just really began to love that experience of going to services. And they weren't easy. They weren't these, drive-through Anglican, have the wine, you're gone, all's good. Like we were sitting in our chairs for like 3 hours sometimes. And
no, these are high barrier moments. People don't appreciate.
And it was intense, and it was as intensely intellectual as it was spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated that. I love the fact that you just didn't take things for granted. I love the fact that you questioned and you challenged your faith. And of course, I became more aware of the history. And so even then, it wasn't until I was pregnant with our first child, our daughter, that I realized suddenly that really hits home. Like, it's all fine to be two people who live together and love each other, being kind of Jewish in my case. But when you are starting a family, as you know, and about to raise a child, well, what is that child going to be? What is this household going to be? And that's when I was pregnant. That's when I began seriously studying and then converting. And I ended up converting right after Miranda was born. She's a convert. She got the mikveh treatment when she was 3 months old. She did not appreciate that. And then we had a Jewish wedding in our New York apartment with our beloved rabbi, and it was really wonderful. And I have to say, it was in some ways more meaningful wedding than my first one, because we had a family. But the night before, David's mother, we had dinner with her in New York, and she was one who I remember she kept impressing upon me the importance, not the importance of what I was doing, but also the warning of, don't go into this lightly. But Danielle, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people don't like Jewish people, and there are risks that you're taking. And at the time, it seemed absolutely absurd to me that this was some act of courage or,
Yes.
And when our children first went to nursery school, they even then, this would have been in the early 90s, there were these tire barricades and things around the Washington, D.C. nursery school where we had moved by that point. And I still didn't understand.
And just to be clear, that nursery school, the program was in a synagogue.
Yes, it was in one of the main synagogues.
Yes.
Of DC, the Adas Israel.
Adas Israel, okay.
And so I didn't. It seemed like, yes, of course, there's been this terrible history, and yes, of course, there's anti-Semitism. Of course, there are always threats, but it's really been in the past 10 years, and more recently, that I've really come to appreciate and experience a lot of the continuing struggle and threats that Jews have dealt with through all time. And
have you ever experienced anti-Semitism personally?
No. What was funny is I experienced it overhearing someone. This is I was at a local farmer's market. This is maybe 5 years ago, I don't know. And I was loading my car, and I was right in front of a Greek restaurant in downtown DC. And there was I think it was the Greek owner of this restaurant sitting out with another person. And I heard him say, "The Jews, they're just like rats. They're everywhere. And the Jews of Europe, they just get in and and I couldn't believe my ears."
Yes.
And I turned to him and I said, "Excuse me, but do you realize you never know who's around and can hear what you're saying? And I just want you to know that I am Jewish, and I take real offense to what you're saying."
Wow. What did he say?
Oh, he's like, oh, I don't know, I wouldn't mean it that way. And then he said to me, you don't look Jewish. And I said, oh, what does that mean? You have some stereotype of how we're supposed to look?
I mean, the anti-Semitism
Right.
based on a
No,
stereotype.
I gave him a hard time. But I mean, that was sort of when you hear it outright. I mean, I haven't personally experienced it in a direct, that was an indirect way. But I think a lot of, and given that I write under my maiden name, I'm not sort of a ready target on Twitter, but I know David gets it. And I've seen really quite horrible things, especially on Twitter, that people will say about him. And he's so able to shrug it off that it never bothers me, but it bothers me. It's there. You see it. It's ugly.
Yeah, no question. When you, your first blush, like when you started dating David, and what did you think of Jews before you entered into David's family?
Well, I had, Toronto was the Jewish world remained very, it overlapped a little bit with our world. And like Paul Godfrey was the publisher of the Toronto Sun. And I worked at the Toronto Sun. My father was at the Toronto. I grew up in the Toronto Sun. So, but it always seemed a very separate world to me. There wasn't a lot of intermixing for whatever reason. I never felt myself any feeling one way or the other. It was mostly just mysterious. And I don't want to say foreign to me, but it was not a world that I was knowledgeable about.
Right.
Just like, right. He's Jewish, he's not Jewish, but it didn't mean anything to me.
Right. There was no, and now looking back all of these years, the meeting with David, the love, the engagement, the marriage, the wedding, the conversion studies, most people on this line probably don't realize, but you in fact gave a nod to it, that unlike the other major confessional faiths, Judaism has a very different approach to becoming a Jew by choice, by conversion. It actually dates back, there was no formal idea of conversion in Judaism until the rebuilding of the Second Temple, when the Jews came back from Babylon. And many of the returnees from Babylon came with non-Jewish spouses. And they approached Ezra the scribe, who was one of the leaders of the exile community, and they said, well, what do we do? And interestingly, Ezra's response to that, it's in the book of Nehemiah, Ezra's response to that was, and Jews have done this ever since, is to teach them what it means to be Jewish. In other words, it wasn't simply a litmus test, a metric exam of what you're prepared to believe. Mm-hmm. But on some level, it required an understanding of what that identity would call you to. And so looking back now all of these years, are there things that you look back and surprise you about Jews and Judaism and what you are now as opposed to maybe what you were before?
I think it's not so much a surprise. To me, it's been a great opening of a community that as I said, I was just generally unaware of. And the things that appealed to me, it wasn't just the ethical responsibility you had to take for your own life and actions, which really appealed to me. It was, as our life would unfold together, it was this focus on family. And then, of course, on community. And I've been very close to my priest growing up, the one who, saw me through my communion. And, but our church community, it always felt very transient, even though I grew up in that church and played in that church, that, it was a lot of, you see people at Christmas, you turn, you shake the person's hand next to you. You put, which now seems absurd to me, a plate goes around and you put like a $20 bill on it, which is like, this seems like a very poor and ineffective way of fundraising. Yeah. But that sense of the community being there for you, we have really experienced it. I experienced it as a convert when we lived in New York before we had children, and then after we had children, moved to DC. We've had a great rabbi here who is very enthusiastic about converts and always went the extra mile to embrace. And he's a real embracing guy. So when we've also seen through, the past few years, the antagonism that some in the ultra Orthodox community have towards converts.
Yes. And
he was like an offsetter of that.
good.
And my first rabbi who converted me, he had made sure that a very respected Orthodox rabbi was part of my conversion. Again, I was naive to all of this, so that when they...
Who was the rabbi?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I knew I was gonna blank, but I will tell you in a minute when you don't ask me, and it will pop back in.
I'll ask you something else.
No, but Shmuel Hertzfeld is our current rabbi, but our first rabbi had made sure that my papers were signed by a very reputable Orthodox rabbi, and I'm like, why the bureaucracy? Why do we care? You sign it. That's good enough for me. And he's like, no, if you ever want to move to Israel, you're going to want this guy's signature. And I didn't fully understand what he was saying, but of course it now makes complete sense. And sadly, because I think, people are willing to move to Israel, become Jews, you don't want to be met by a committee that says, look who thinks she's Jewish,
The irony of it is that the Jews who need as many people as possible, we tend to have the heaviest door that people have to push their way to get in. And it's interesting. Was the rabbi who was the co-signator, was that Shlomo Riskin?
I will have zero memory of this.
No
I'm
problem.
sorry. I should have looked it up.
No, you don't have to.
But he was so fleeting in my life. He just came in, signed the paper, and
walked out. I want to, I did a little research. Don't get scared. I did and I found a wonderful article that you wrote on the Huffington Post about the time of year that we are in. And I'm going to read you know what it is. It was so heartwarming and funny and smart. And I want to read it to the people who are here, because I think they're going to catch something in this that I did as well. Danielle was talking about the Christmas experience of someone who becomes Jewish. And in fact, the title of the article, if you're interested, you can look after it in Google. It's called I'm a Christmas Schnorrer, and it rhymes with menorah. So it goes like this. Finally, the great morning itself. Months of work are consumed in about 8 minutes. A carnage of gift wrapping glitters across the carpet. The children, ungrateful little beasts, immediately declare they're bored. The turkey is like 72 hours away. Dad is crumpled into the corner of the sofa in an improbable sweater. Mom's exhausted, bleary-eyed from staying up until 1 a.m. to wrap the last presents, fill the stockings, ensure the turkey was ready to be placed. She declares the holiday started and reaches for the booze. But as a Jew, all of this is unknown. We've completed our holiday ordeal earlier in the fall, and no one writes cheerful songs about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, whose message can be summed up as, Happy New Year, you should be so lucky. I mean, it was just perfect. And the story, or the article that you go on to write, juxtaposes your position so beautifully, in that you're both an insider and an outsider all at the same time.
Well, it also means I get to, because my parents and my mother are still alive, thank God, we get to celebrate both. So my children were big Christmas schnorrers too, but actually I thought you were going to read a different one, which is where we carefully delineated, of course, Christmas from Hanukkah, through the children's early years. And Christmas was at grandma's, and we never leaned into the religious content. There was Santa, that was it. There were presents. It was great. And then one year, my son, who was about 7 at the time, got very annoyed that we were not making, I mean, I made a big deal about Hanukkah. I did that North American Jewish thing. It's like, hey, 8 nights, present every night. Like really trying to sell this alternative, but clearly in their eyes, inferior holiday. And he said, Mom, why can't we have lights? And I said, well, dear, that's a Christian thing. You put lights. I said, Mom, it's called a festival of light. Let's have lights. And so I went to our modern Orthodox Rabbi Hertzfeld, and I said, my son's saying, he's got a point here. Like, lights aren't holy. Why can't we have blue and white lights outside our house? And he goes, Danielle, there's no reason you can't do that. And then I started looking into it, and I said, well, look, cedar, juniper, these are all trees of the Holy Land. Why can't I spent one day when you're making a Star of David out of cedar and fir boughs. And then I put blue lights around it. And then I hung like I found little ornaments that had like a dill pickle and a bagel and a cup of coffee. and I put that out. And I said, Rabbi, is that bad? He goes, it's wonderful. And then my rabbi now has the most garishly lit house in all of his neighborhood, and he gets the giant dreidel, the inflatable dreidel out, and the menorah, and he puts lights everywhere. And I feel proud. Like, what's wrong with us embracing this? We're North Americans. It's part of there is nothing so religious, and I think maybe that's what you're talking about, the zeal of the convert.
Yes,
it's to say, look, we don't have to be miserable. We don't have to sit in the dark. We can make this, we can participate in the culture of the country that we live in, and apply it to our own.
Yes.
And now every year we do that. I ended up making a permanent Star of David out of birch logs that I wrap in blue lights, and I plop it on our front, porch so people can see it. And I get a lot of positive feedback. Like, Jews driving up the street stop their car, pull over, and go, that is a Star of David. So it's I think it's a wonderful tradition, and it makes you feel both less left out, but it's also, you're also embracing your own traditions. So
100%. One of the gifts that Jews by choice converts bring is it's an echo of Tennyson's words of seeing things with new eyes, and that the ability to see things not through the prism of decades, centuries of European experience transplanted to America, but something fresh and new, which interestingly I think is something that Israel has brought to the Jewish experience. Very different eyes in terms of Judaism and the Jewish world and how we perceive ourselves. I pointed out a few weeks ago, when you look at the Passover Haggadahs from the 19th century, the 18th century, when it talks about the 4 children and it comes to the evil one, many, many times, particularly in Europe, the evil child was the image of a soldier. And today, because of Israel, we would never do that.
Right. Well, Israel too, I've spent a lot of time there, especially when I did this website that you mentioned. And my eldest daughter, Miranda, also the convert.
Yes.
Less by choice at the time.
Indeed.
Spent 3 years living there.
Oh, did she? Where did she live?
Hebrew. She speaks Hebrew, sorry. And she loved it. She went there not out of any Zionist thing. She just thought it was cool.
Yes.
It was like, and she went there and she loved it so much. And she loved it for everything that was not about, in some ways, Zionism. She loved that it was so forward thinking, that it was the Israelis and their spirit and the Tel Aviv life and the incredible creative things they were doing. Yes. And I think that's what I worry that we get locked in North America is this very old Eastern European way of doing things. We don't have as much as the Sephardic in our, immigration pool. And so I think learning from that, and Israelis are unabashedly enthusiastic and assertive. So where they go, David and I went to Hungary like 3 years ago. And I've now make it a habit to go see the Jewish neighborhoods or go on a Jewish tour if one exists, because I find that so much of the history of a country, aside from just being interested,
Yeah.
you learn so much more when you go on a Jewish tour, because you see it's not just a series of dates and leaders. You really see a cultural background to it. And we went, and even in Budapest, under this not very nice government that they have now, and where a lot of things are being oppressed, and certainly, there's a lot of anti-Semitism there. There were these Israeli outposts in the Jewish neighborhoods, and they were opening these startup restaurants with, wonderful Israeli food, and bringing colors and sort of Israeli social traditions, like fun outdoor parties and things like that. And that, to me, that is the life. That is how the religion grows with its modernization and its boldness. And it's not, and not being this kind of shtetl, oh, we can't do that because, that would be too Christian, or we don't want to draw attention to ourselves. So I've been very influenced by the Israeli view of Judaism.
And that's a really, really healthy thing. My grandmother, who, along with my father, he was a year old, and my grandfather, they left Germany in 1936, just in time, and they landed, of course, in Brooklyn. And my grandmother, for years, I lived in Israel for 8 years myself. Went to university. I was in the army. I was ordained in Israel. And my grandmother always said to me, she used to say, Aaron, you're not a Jew, you're an Israeli. And because she always walked around, and understandably so, she walked around with a fear about not trusting the world, that somehow her condition would be subject to the winds of the world. And one of the things I think that Israel has contributed to a healthier mental well-being for Jews is a sense that we're not victims. We can be assertive, and
also that we're different. It's like, I think I lost count, but I think in Israel there's something like more than 200 nationalities of Jews who have congregated.
Yes.
So there's like Nigerian Jews and Iraqi Jews and French Jews, and then they put all their cuisine together in these crazy fusions that are amazing. But that sense that you're a Jew, I'm a Jew, we look completely different, but we share something.
Yes.
And that is strength. To me, that is strength.
Have you experienced, my wife and I 2 years ago were on the Spanish Steps in Rome. And when I travel, generally, I always make a point to wear my kippah when I travel around, unless it's like really dangerous, right?
So like the Paris subway or something.
Exactly. But otherwise, I'll put a baseball cap on. But then she says to me, Aaron, the only people who wear baseball caps over 30 years old are adult Jewish men who don't want to be seen wearing their kippah. Okay.
Yeah.
My wife is on this call. So, Lovey, yes, sweetheart, I gave you credit for that.
There you are, very subtly, in your American sneakers, your North American sneakers, your beard, and the baseball cap.
Exactly. So anyway, there's this North American couple, obviously in New York, because I know that accent. And they have this map they're opening up. And he looks over, I can see he's looking at me. And he goes, do you know where the central synagogue of Rome is? And I said, oh, I've just been bageled out. So I go over and I tell him where it is, because we had just been there. In my conversations with David, he's so open and honest about the wonderful, wonderful marriage that the two of you enjoy. And I want to open our conversation to just a few questions from the public, but I have two last questions to ask you. One, do you think your marriage, plural, would have been as good as it is had you not chosen to become Jewish?
You mean if we'd gotten married,
yes.
The same people, but I did not convert?
Yes.
Well, No, but I have to think why that is. Because I think marriage succeeds regardless of religion, that you are both on the same page together, whatever that page is. And that's why I think it became important when we had children that you don't want to be in a continuous argument over the years of do we do this or do we do that? Now, if I had been a passionate Catholic, for example, that would be a big problem. And that would have been something that we would have had to work out. And I think our affection for each other is such that we probably could have come to an accommodation. But I also think that I think we're just both all in, whatever it is. And if we're not both all in on something, then we don't do it or we question it. But I think it's more a symbol of being, and I think also one of the reasons I was attracted to him was because of his faith, his faith in his faith, as it were. I mean, if I'm falling in love with David, I'm falling in love with his identity and what made that identity. And Judaism was a much stronger part of his identity than my religion was of my identity. So it's not that it was an easy thing for me to give up, in the sense I didn't think I was giving up anything. I was actually enhancing my own belief and my own religion. If that makes sense.
What kind of advice would you give to couples who are married and dating somebody perhaps seriously who's not of their faith, a Jew who's dating someone who's not Jewish? What kind of advice would you give to people?
Oh man, I'm not your rabbi. This is your department. This is your department. I mean, look, it's happening. It's happening in our family. My eldest son is dating a lovely girl, and she is Catholic. And I think if I were younger and this were happening, I may have taken a stronger, more, what are you doing? You can't do it. I could have done that. I think maybe just because I'm older, and I feel if the person is right and you take this attitude of being all in, then you're going to work it out somehow. I know that's a weak answer, and I know it's not one that those of strong faith like to hear, but I also feel there's only so much you can do, but it is a conversation you have to have. And I appreciated the conversation that Barbara had with me the night before my conversion. I mean, even though we were married, obviously, but that sense of, I just remember her saying, this is important. This is serious.
Yes.
And that's, as a parent, I think you have that obligation to say to your children, look, this is important. This is serious. And I know my children have been raised with very strong Jewish identities. Maybe the real test of being Jewish is, do you have Jewish grandparents? Grandchildren, that's what David says. But I know it's a difficult thing. But I also have learned it's not something the parents can have a huge influence over.
I agree, by the way. I think, they're always our children, but they're not children. Right. So there's a point in that where they have to make decisions on their own and make whatever good things or mistakes that they make.
It would certainly not help. I know this. If I were to go and say to his, potential fiance, well, we love you. You're great. But, could you go convert, please? Like, I know that's not going to work. And that's not a productive way to approach it. You just, in the end, you have to hope that the values and everything that you hope you've conveyed to them will stick or have influence.
And to that point, I also think that there's actually far more that our children get from what they see than from what they hear. Mm-hmm. And the decisions that you have made and David had made, and placing the things that you do front and center, what's important and what you've made important in your life, one has to believe that it resounds, within the children at some point. So,
well, as David actually said that point very strongly when he said, children are deaf, but they see everything.
Oh, yes. No, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. So we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to open this up. And for those people who would like to ask Danielle, a question. The rules are as follows. First of all, it has to be a question. And this is a Jewish program, so who knows? And there is a function that's available on the Zoom where you can virtually raise your hand. So I'm going to ask you if you could do that if you want. Otherwise, Danielle and I will very happily continue talking. So would anyone like to ask a question? Going through here, lots of pages of people. I don't see any questions.
I would like to ask a question.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes. How did your family feel about you marrying a Jewish person?
My mother was, okay, I'll just be honest. She said, Jewish men make great husbands. I'd be more upset if you were Catholic. That's what my Anglican mother said. No, my parents really love David. And again, I think being Anglican is less, it's not a very Orthodox religion. So they were just happy I was something, you know, but also David helped because they really loved him.
There's a lot to love. Anyone else? Okay, everyone's shy. No question here, but oh, lots of compliments are coming in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. I wanted to, in lieu of people asking questions, I wanted to share a story, and it's such a beautiful story. It reaches all the way back to the founding of the state of Israel and David Ben-Gurion, and at the onset, close to the War of Independence, there was lots of skirmishes taking place between, well, the pre-Israelis and Arabs. And his son, Amos, had gotten wounded. And he was in hospital, and he fell in love with his nurse, who was a Scottish woman named Mary. And they fell madly in love with each other, and they were going to get married. And Ben-Gurion realized that it would be a calamity if the first prime minister of Israel, if his son ended up marrying someone who wasn't Jewish. So apart from what probably he was also thinking of all the political considerations. So he contacts this rabbi, also well-known rabbi from New Jersey. His name was Joachim Prinz, who also is featured in Philip Roth's book, The Plot Against America. And they get this telegram to Prinz asking him if he would show up at Kennedy Airport on a Friday morning and fly to London for the weekend at the bequest of David Ben-Gurion. Well, if a rabbi gets that request, you get on a plane. So he makes his way to London. And there, these operatives, agents, pick him up, bring him to a hotel. He walks into the room, and this young woman, Mary, is there. And he's told that they're going to get married, and she needs to convert, and he has the weekend. So he says, okay. He takes out his notepad, and they start studying Judaism. Friday, Shabbat day, Sunday, Monday morning, she goes to the mikvah. He gets on the plane, goes back to New Jersey. She goes to Israel. And many years later, Rabbi Prinz wrote in his autobiography, he said that David Ben-Gurion had told him decades later that the only real Jew in the entire Ben-Gurion family was Mary. He goes, the bunch of us are Israelis, but she's a real Jew. And Prinz later on wrote that of all the conversions he did, the one that spent a weekend in London was the most successful one he did in his life.
That's so funny. Well, there is as a friend of ours who grew up as a Reform Jew, married a woman who converted, and he had like grown up in a household where they had Christmas trees and like Christmas trees, not Hanukkah bushes, Christmas trees. And he bemoaned later that he had married the Ayatollah of Judaism. that there can be a fierceness in the cover, and suddenly they were having to keep kosher, and you know, now his parents,
the real joke is that this Jewish boy marries a girl who converts, and then his mother is trying to reach him on Shabbat, and he won't pick up.
Right.
So then she calls again on Sunday, and she says, "What are you doing?" he says, Ma, you know, ever since the conversion, we observe Shabbat now. She goes, I told you not to marry. You should have married someone Jewish.
I feel that like if our children were ever really to rebel, you talk about, oh, what if they marry a non-Jew? No, they become ultra Orthodox.
So true.
Mom, I can't eat in your house anymore. I'm sorry. Like
that's a whole other conversation.
It's a whole other.
It's a whole other conversation. But
Right.
Danielle, I just want to thank you so much. This hour has clicked.
I'm so honored to
No,
be a
really, and
convert spokesperson.
No, I think that the insight that people have, some of the mistakes that people make about being a Jew by choice and conversion, what a Jew is and what Jewish is, right? Those can be different things at times. That Jews see themselves not just as faith, but more importantly, that there's a peoplehood about the Jewish people that you've so beautifully spoken about and to. And that ultimately the idea of conversion, of becoming a Jew is one of the most authentic things that Judaism stands for, because famously in Jewish tradition, we're told that there were no Jews before Mount Sinai. The people who lived in Egypt who were slaves, they were Hebrews, they were Israelites, but they weren't Jews. Jews, so on some level, we're all converts. And that's what the ancient rabbis wanted the Jewish people to know. The sense of not just dedication, but rededicating ourselves to something afresh. And your voice, along with many other Jews by choice, do that to me daily, reminding me about what's important about us. So,
well, thank you. It's such an honor and truly a pleasure. And I do appreciate your thoughts because, as you know, as a convert, you often feel like an imposter. So you don't want to be telling anybody, you know, about their religion.
A moment, and I know I was meant to close up, but I can't stop talking. Was there a moment where you felt and you said to yourself, yeah, I'm really Jewish now?
There wasn't like that moment I ate smoked fish and went, yeah.
You had herring and you said, oh, this actually tastes good.
Yeah, no, never been a fan of herring.
Me too.
I think, you know, I think it's been through, maybe it has been more in the landmark celebrations where you're in the synagogue and you're watching your child be bar bat mitzvahed.
Yes.
And you feel, it's more a feeling of being part of the community. It's not, and this is the great thing about becoming a Jew, is it stops being about you. It becomes about a greater self, a greater community, your connection to that community and to your family. And that to me is what being a Jew is about. And in a way, to me, it's very liberating not to have to be always thinking about my personal relationship to God. I mean, obviously that goes through your head, but that in a way, very, very selfish and singular viewpoint I had before becoming a Jew, and then being embraced and becoming a part of a community bigger than myself. And to me, that is what it means to be Jewish.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure meeting you all.
No, thank you. Everyone have a wonderful evening. And I want to thank Danielle Crittenden Frum for the hour of her time. She's really given us much to think about on this as we're approaching the final night of Hanukkah. So Danielle, I hope—
Happy Hanukkah.
Yes. I hope we're able to meet in person without masks soon.
Yes.
And give my love to David and your family.
I will. What a wonderful, fabulous woman.
Oh, that's so sweet. Everyone, thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
A wonderful evening.